This video covers everything you need to know for 3D printing jewelry in a way that gets you perfect prints every single time. And when I say everything, this includes the real world constraints, the physics behind it, and how to control for them so that way you can troubleshoot and mitigate any issues that come up. This is the most in-depth video on this topic that I've seen on this platform. So sit back and take notes over the next 30-ish minutes as I'm going to go over all of the understanding and techniques that pros as well as companies alike use to make 3D printing a consistent and reliable part of their process. And with that, it's time to lock in. So to start off, we're gonna break this video down into about 6 parts. These 6 parts are going to be 1, how a resin printer works, which I'm pretty sure most of the people watching this already kind of have a good idea, but we'll still go over it anyway. 2, design tolerancing for 3D printing. I know some people, they just like to design and print, but we're gonna cover this because it's gonna make you guys very, very sharp and very, very detailed. 3, the print settings that I use, and we're gonna go over those. There is a specific type of resin that I use. We're gonna talk about that in a little bit. 4, preparation for printing. This step is gonna be very important, mainly because 3D printing is a physical phenomenon, right? So we have to deal with most of the issues that come up in the physical world, not just the software. 5, finished prints and curing. This is just gonna be a bonus step. This is what we use here at BusyWorks, so that way our prints come out clean and they are ready for casting. And of course, 6, the potential issues that you can have while 3D printing and how we mitigate or eliminate these issues entirely. And hopefully I'll explain this in a way that's going to be nice and streamlined, very, very easy to follow. But before we lock in, my name's Salo. I'm an engineer and designer, and I've spent the past few years perfecting the process of designing and creating jewelry from scratch. And I'm currently on a journey to become the littiest jeweler on YouTube. So if you could please like and subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. It would definitely help me to get towards my goal. And I know some of my people are gonna be like, yo, Salo, where are the jokes? Where are the jokes? Blah, 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 blah. I'm just gonna put a bunch of jokes at the end. Don't worry about it. This video is supposed to be a serial video, so I'm gonna try to be completely serial the entire time. No milk, let's do this. A resin printer is a technological marvel that allows us to take 3D designs that are created on the computer and then create an identical version or replica of this 3D design in real life. Now, I use the term identical somewhat loosely, but the reason for this will make sense once we get over into the next part when we deal with tolerancing. The way the printer creates this replica is by taking the 3D model and cutting it into slices or 2D layers and printing or curing the resin layer by layer until it builds up to the full 3-dimensional design. Now, the thickness of these layers are controlled by a property called layer height. It's not something that you need to understand right now, but it's just best to keep that in the back of your mind. The 4 main components of a 3D printer that you need to know is 1, the resin vat, 2, the build plate, 3, the screen, and then 4, the UV protection boundary or container that normally comes with these machines. And the beauty of these machines is how these 4 components come together to create 3D prints. The resin vat, as the name implies, holds the resin. And for this video, we'll be talking about Soraya purple castable resin. Now, this resin is wax-based, and this is the resin that we exclusively use here at BusyWorks. So if you see any numbers or settings involving this video, it's implied to work specifically for this resin. Don't worry though, because after this video, you're going to know how to find your own optimal settings for the resin that you're using. The resin vat also has a transparent film on the bottom of it to allow UV light to go through for curing the resin as it's printing. We're gonna discuss more on that in a little bit. The build plate is the surface that the 3D print is built upon. And normally these build plates are attached to a lead screw system that's able to control the height of the build plate with exceptional precision. The build plate is the moving part of the system that also controls the height of each layer. It can also determine how much stress or strain is on the part while it's printing, depending on how fast it moves up or down. So it's actually very important to understand how this component works. Next we have is the screen, and the screen simply works by allowing a UV lamp underneath to pass light through it or not, dependent on a specific shape. Now, these specific shapes are dependent on the layers or slices that we discussed previously. And essentially, this is what cures the resin to the build plate as it's printing. Now, the screen does this layer by layer to produce the entire 3D print. Now, of course, this UV light is dangerous, not to mention UV light from the environment, say that you have a window where sunlight can come through, can also somewhat cure the print as it's printing. So protection, of course, needs to be taken into consideration. And this protection normally comes in the form of a UV protected container. Now, with these UV protected containers, they don't allow UV light to pass through both sides. So essentially you're free from the UV light of the environment coming in and messing up the print, as well as UV light from the screen coming out and burning out your eyes. Now, these containers are an important part of the process. Not only do they help increase the precision of the print itself, but they also help preserve detail by not allowing excess resin on the surface to cure. Now, these are the 4 components of a resin printer, and as you're troubleshooting, most of your problems are going to come down to one of these 4. So at the end of the day, 3D printing is a complex physical phenomenon, so understanding how the machine works is going to greatly help you understand how to troubleshoot for potential issues that might come down the road. Now, I'm sure most of you guys already knew most of this stuff by now. Like, it's been covered pretty much a million times on this platform. So let's get into the next thing that's going to get you even closer to being a pro when it comes to resin printing. Let's get into tolerancing. Now, tolerancing for 3D printing is something that a lot of people are scared to touch, mainly because when it comes to jewelry, tolerancing isn't as important if you're setting the stones by hand, mainly because you're gonna have to cut those housings by hand as well, right? So it's not as important, but what happens when you try to use advanced techniques like stone casting? Or what happens when you have complex geometry where your tools are not able to reach? In situations like this, tolerancing is everything. Now, there are 2 types of tolerancing that we need to worry about when we're talking about resin 3D printing, and that's XY tolerancing as well as Z tolerancing. Now, the XY tolerance is dependent on the screen of the printer, while the Z tolerance is dependent solely on the build plate and the layer height. Let's talk about XY tolerancing first. Now, most screens for resin printers use square pixels, and all these square pixels do is they just need to know if they need to allow the UV light from the lamp underneath to pass through or not, depending on the shape of that layer that needs to be cured. Now, a standard size for these pixels is usually 0.05 millimeters by 0.05 millimeters, which is really, really small. And I know you guys are probably wondering, well, Salo, where does that tolerancing come in? Well, what happens when you have a layer that has a shape where the edge of that shape barely touches over one of these pixels? Well, the software is going to deem that that pixel needs to allow light to come through, and it's going to add 0.05 millimeters of material to the edge of that shape. Now, this usually happens on all edges of that layer or of that shape. So what we normally do is we take one side, we add on the opposite side as well, and then we get a tolerancing of 0.1 millimeters in both the X and the Y direction. So to compensate for this tolerance, you would essentially try and scale your model to where you take off 0.1 millimeters on either side. Now, let's say we're printing 2 parts that need to interact with each other. Say, for instance, that we have a cylinder that needs to go perfectly in a round hole, right? Essentially, we would have the tolerancing of the cylinder as well as the tolerancing of the hole, right? So we would add 0.1 millimeters for the tolerancing of the cylinder as well as 0.1 millimeters for the tolerancing of the hole. And that's how we come to that iconic 0.2 millimeter tolerance that's agreed upon for resin printers. So if you ever wondered why that 0.2 millimeter tolerance was the recommended tolerance for 3D printers, now you know. Told you I was dropping gems. And speaking of gems, stones like diamonds, moissanite, sapphire, as well as others, they're normally cut to an even higher tolerance than this. So if you're tolerancing for stone casting, 0.1 millimeters in the XY direction is normally just more than enough. As for the Z tolerancing, that is entirely dependent on that layer height that we discussed previously. Now, most 3D printers and most manufacturers, they'll say to print things at 0.05 millimeter layer height. In fact, that's the standard. Now, this is a good layer height for most prints, but when it comes to jewelry, at least with BusyWorks, we bring that number down as low as possible. Now, we do this mainly because it reduces the visibility of those layer lines that comes from that layer height, and that gives us a smoother finish when casting. Now, the lowest layer height I believe that most 3D printers can go is 0.01 millimeters, and this is probably due to the stepper motor that's in the lead screw system being the highest tolerance or the highest achievable precision that stepper motor can obtain. But that is also the smallest tolerance that you can have in the Z direction. And so because of this limitation, you can actually get higher tolerance on certain parts of a print depending on how you angle the print perpendicular to that build plate. So the more perpendicular the component of that print is relative to the build plate or relative to the screen, the more accuracy that you're gonna have and the more precision that you can obtain for that part. So if I needed extreme precision, say for the housing of a stone, I'm actually going to be able to achieve that the more that I print it on its side. Now you can go for even more accuracy in your prints if you use, like a little bit of trigonometry, take the angle of the component that you're trying to get that high tolerance for, dependent on that build plate, and then just use trig to kind of figure out exactly what tolerancing you need. But I will say for 99.99% of cases, tolerancing for 0.2 millimeters in the XY direction, as well as 0.01 millimeters, or even adding those up to 0.02 millimeters in the Z direction is going to get most of the things that you're going to need, like in any situation ever. And so, yeah, now that you understand tolerancing, let's hop right into those print settings so that way you know what we use, and then you also know how to change it depending on what you need. Let's do it. Now, when it comes to print settings, they're going to differ dependent on the printer that you're using, as well as the type of resin that you're using. As stated before though, we're going to give you the numbers for Soraya Tech purple castable resin that we use in-house to get perfect prints every single time. Now, settings that you find online, they're usually for printing at the recommended layer height of 0.05 millimeters. But as stated before, our castings, we print them at 0.01 millimeters. So how does that affect the rest of the settings? Well, the first thing that needs to change is that the exposure times are gonna have to drop. This is mainly because there's less resin to cure between each layer because there's a smaller layer height. And so because there's a smaller layer height, less resin to cure, less exposure time to that UV light to cure that resin. In fact, if you kept the exposure times the same, it's actually going to overcure each layer, which comes with its own potential set of issues. Part of the problems that come with overexposure is the print sticking to the film at the bottom of the vat of resin and potentially rupturing it. And trust me, from personal experience, you don't want that. Now, another thing that needs to change is the amount of bottom layers as well as the transition layers. And the reason for this is simple. When you have a lower layer height, you actually need more layers to be overexposed and stick to the build plate, so that way the actual print itself has more structural stability, so that way the entire print can actually print without coming off of the build plate. And finally, the lift and retract speed of the build plate also needs to be lowered. This is because there's less material per layer, and so when it comes to the stresses and the strains that occur while the print is printing, those stresses and strains actually affect each layer more of the print. This stress and strain of the print is what leads to warping. So if you've had a print that came out and it comes out a little bit warped, it's probably because that lift and retract speed is going a little too fast. So we lower that lift and retract speed so that way there's less strain on each layer and therefore you have less warping of that final end product. Here's a side-by-side comparison of the recommended settings for this resin as well as the settings that we use to print at this layer height. We just did a lot of testing to figure out what's optimal for us at this layer height, and this is something that you're going to need to do as well. But generally just remember, slower lift and retract speed, smaller layer height, of course, more bottom layers and transition layers to account for the smaller layer height. And the most important thing, turning down that exposure because again, you have less material or less resin to be cured, and so you don't want to overexpose. Another hidden factor that we use is we turn our anti-aliasing all the way up to 8. Now, what anti-aliasing does is that it just smoothens that transition between layers, which means that those layer lines are going to be even less visible now. And that's exactly what we want, especially for jewelry. The last thing I want to go over is our support settings. Now, these don't matter as much because every different design is going to need its own specific way to support the design as it's printing, and that's normally going to change as you go. But I did say at the start of this video that I was going to include everything, and so that means everything. So here you go. You can give me a like and subscribe if you wish to pay me back. Hint, hint. But for most of our jewelry and even most of our designs, we generally just use these settings. Now, if the print fails, of course, we'll just add more support material where the print specifically failed, and it normally just works the very next time. Now, very rarely do we ever change any of these settings. In fact, normally if there's an issue, we don't even look at the software directly. We go and we try to figure out if there's a physical problem. Now again, 3D printing and resin printing specifically is a physical phenomenon. So if you're using the recommended settings and you're still having issues, the problem is most likely a physical one. So let's talk about these issues and how to mitigate them or eliminate them entirely with going over preparation for printing. Let's do it. Now, printing preparation is definitely one of those topics that people, for some reason, just like to skip, but it's probably one of the most important. And it's also going to determine if this is an enjoyable process for you or an aggravating one. So let's start with the basics. You're going to want to make sure that your build plate is clean and free of any resin residue. Here at BusyWorks, we actually clean our build plate with isopropyl alcohol after every single print. That way it's just ready to go on the next one. Now you're also going to want to keep your resin as fresh as possible with mixing half old resin, half new resin if you need to reuse old resin. Now the reason that you're going to want to do this is because old resin has some molecules in it that were previously cured from a previous print. So when it comes to the layers merging together, having fresh resin is going to ensure that every single layer can actually adhere to each other as it's building. When it comes to the film for the resin vat as well, not all films are the same. There are normally 3 on the market, and those are PFA, ACF, and FEP. FEP films, or fluorinated ethylene propylene, I believe I said that correctly. These films are traditionally the most affordable films, and that's most likely the film that came with your 3D printer when you bought it. The problem with this film is that it has a higher release tension than the other films, which adds extra strain to your part as it's printing and releasing from that film on the bottom of the resin vat. This film also degrades the fastest, which could lead to resin leaking through the film as it's pulled repeatedly and repeatedly, getting onto your screen and then hardening the next time you print something, which will harden the resin to your screen. Now this happened to us destroying one of our screens before, and it caused us to have to replace the entire screen. As you can tell, FEP is just a no-go zone for us. Now ACF, or Advanced Composite Film, I believe that's what the term stands for. It's a newer, more premium film that has somewhat of a milky texture to it, And one of the good things about this film is that it has the lowest release tension out of all of the films. This allows for it to be the best when it comes to high-speed printing. Now, the problems that we've had with this film is that the milky texture slightly refracts the UV light as it's passing through, and it causes the prints to be slightly fuzzier and the details are slightly less sharp. Now, because of this, our go-to is normally PFA film. The reason being is that it does have a lower release tension than the FEP film, allowing for us to do slightly faster prints, slightly less issues, slightly less problems, less warping because it's able to release from that film easier, so there's less strain. And then, of course, it has an excellent durability or an excellent lifespan. And on top of everything, it's clear. So the prints, they come out nice and clean, nice and sharp. And I think that choosing a film is really just in your department, which you think works best for you or which you think works best for the use case. But when it comes to printing jewelry, I would say go with PFA. That works for us 10 times out of 10. Next thing I want to go over is ventilation. Most resin has sulfur in it, which allows it to cure or harden when it's exposed to UV light. Now, during this curing process, a lot of sulfuric gases are released into the atmosphere, which equals the room in which you're 3D printing. I know some resin says non-toxic or odorless, things of that nature. Don't listen to them, fam. Go ahead and get you some ventilation, my boy. I promise you. Like, I'm pretty sure you can Google what happens when you inhale sulfuric gases. Like, just don't do it, my boy. Here at BusyWorks, we use a simple ventilation system that takes all of the fumes and routes it outside of our build space. We suggest that you do the same, and we're just gonna leave it at that. Wiping my hands of all responsibility. Last thing I wanna touch on is temperature control. Now, while our housing is built to keep in the fumes and to route them outside of our build space, the other reason is simply for temperature control. Now, the resin itself is a liquid, and because of that, the viscosity of that liquid or the thickness of it is dependent on the temperature of that liquid. Now, a lack of temperature control we found is the #1 reason for warping throughout a print. This is because as viscosity changes, this also changes the stress and the strain on the print. And the lower the layer height that you have, the more this stress or this strain causes warping between each layer. This is why temperature control is so fundamental to lower layer heights. In fact, we just use a simple heater that turns on or off dependent on this temperature controller. We normally keep our temperature inside of our environment between 26.5 and 27.5 degrees Celsius. Now, if you look at the recommended temperature for our resin, it's like smack dab right in the middle of it. And of course, you can actually control this temperature range even more if you wanted to. The main thing is that you want to mitigate and control this temperature as much as possible while printing, so that way you get as minimum warping as possible. Anytime you have drastic changes in temperature, you're probably going to see that more significantly at lower layer heights. And with that, I believe that's all the printing prep that you need to know. Now let's go and see what happens after the printer is done printing and we're taking the prints off. We're getting ready to cure, getting ready to cast. Everybody's having a celebration. Let's go ahead and let's go over to that part. I'll see you guys there. Yo, so we about to take some stuff off the print. Let's go see how they turned out. All right, so these are my 3D printers right here. This one I normally use for making the wax prints. And then this one right here I use to make solid moldings for people to try out. So we're gonna be taking both of these off, see how the damage is. All right, so putting on some safety goggles. I'm put on some gloves, and the gloves are just to make sure like the resin, it don't get all on your hands and everything, because it is like toxic to the touch. Not toxic to breathe, but you probably don't want to breathe it in either. That's why I have this mask that I normally only wear on camera, but I'm getting better at it. So I hope you guys can hear me. This is how I sound with the mask on. I'm probably gonna be yelling. So now we're just taking off the pieces right here. You know what, screw it. I'm actually just gonna risk it for the video, just so you guys can hear me. And see, that's how I love you. I'm a real one, because I'm risking my respiratory health to give you guys a good video. I'm gonna take some paper towel, and what I'm gonna do is I'm going to be cleaning off the top. I'm cleaning off the top to get rid of like all of this excess resin that's going to like, you know, fall and everything, get all over the place. It's gonna be nasty, right? Here are our prints for today. All right, so normally the way that I take these off, I use a chisel to get underneath it, and then I use a mallet to kind of like easily like take it off, nice and slowly. Boom. All right, after the pieces are taken off, I take some isopropyl alcohol. You always want to clean this off before you put it back in. Clean all of that resin and get all of that. You want to just soak it real good. Okay, so now, nice and clean, gonna put that back. I'm gonna throw the case back on just so the fumes don't kill me. My cameraman is on his last leg, so. My cameraman is on his last leg, so let's pray for him. All right, so let's take out the big dog. We're gonna take out the behemoth. And normally I print a lot of stuff on this, and I know you guys want to see a whole bunch of pieces. So let's look at the damage. Let's look at how many pieces we done printed out. We're gonna go ahead and clean off the top. All right, time for the big reveal. And 3, 2, 1. So there's only 2 pieces on here. Yeah, so I forgot that in this print I only printed two pieces. So yeah, it's gonna do the same thing. Okay, so now we have all of these off. We're gonna take our time, clean off all of this support material. You just want to make sure you don't damage the part itself. You want to have a nice clean casting, as well as keeping the part clean. So the mood stone, it actually does feel nice. This could be some ASMR, I'm not gonna lie. I might put that as one of the tags.
Yeah.
By the way, parts that are flying off and everything, this is why you need safety goggles. You know, here at BusyWorks, we really care about safety. We're always safety first. So look, so sometimes the prints, they come out bad. This one, the bottom part wasn't printed, and so we just can't use this. So this one, we'll just have to print again, which I mean, it's fine, it's whatever. So the purple resin, that's wax, that's what we're gonna be using to cast with. The black resin is an ABS type of resin, so like plastic, and I'm sending this to the client so that way they can try it on before we go ahead and cast. So now we're gonna take our pieces, we're gonna place them in some isopropyl alcohol to clean them off. I normally like to clean the wax resin in one set of alcohol and then the black resin or the ABS resin in a different set of alcohol, just so like, you know, the wax stuff doesn't like contaminate the other. I'm gonna put the ABS resin in this other isopropyl alcohol that I have. That's specifically for the black one. Whew. The black ones stink way more than the wax. I'm just gonna shake them up. You can also throw them in the ultrasonic, but clearly I'm a little too lazy. Okay, so now we're gonna take them out of the isopropyl alcohol. And what the isopropyl alcohol does is it cleans off all of the resin that hasn't been cured on the piece. So from this point, these two different types of resins have different constraints for them to sort of be cured, right? The wax resin, in order to get a clean burnout, you want to cure them with no oxygen present. So we actually place them in vegetable glycerin. These, however, you can cure in water or you can just cure straight out in the air. Just because it's ABS plastic, we're not gonna be doing anything special with it besides hardening it and sending it to the client. So now I'm just drying these off. And as I'm drying these off, what I'm gonna be doing, I'm going to take this out. And what this does is, if you notice the wax, it floats. And if it floats, it's going to allow oxygen to get into the cure. So I created this little cage to kind of keep everything below the glycerin level or water level, or I guess it's glycerin, so I guess it is glycerin level. Now, place it on top, and now as you can see, all of the resin is underneath that water line, so no oxygen is going to get into the print as it cures. So this right here is my curing station. And essentially I have aluminum foil around this because aluminum foil is the only thing that can reflect UV light. And so we have an enclosure, you wanna get in there? We have an enclosure that has, essentially this is the UV light, and then this is the aluminum foil, and it just allows the UV light to find its way into the resin to cure it. So we're gonna go ahead, put it under that light for 10 minutes, actually 15, and then in 15, the light is gonna stop, and then we're gonna pull out the prints. So just wanted to show you guys, this is where the ABS plastic is in, or the ABS resin. This is just water, and as you can see, it sinks in water as most resins do. So yeah, this one, you don't need that cool like little cage thingy. Also, after it's cured, you don't gotta worry about like ventilation or anything like that. Yeah. We let the glycerin drip in because this stuff does get kind of expensive. So now all that's left is to dry them and then throw them in some plastic baggies. I normally throw them in plastic baggies so that way they don't get any dust or dirt on them before we make the casting tree. Yeah, so I'm drying them by hand because glycerin, it just doesn't normally dry by itself. And so you kind of gotta like rub it off. And then once I get most of the glycerin off of it, I'm just gonna take it, throw it in the baggie. And this way it doesn't get dirty. So that's how I save it before I'm ready to make the casting tree. And so let me go ahead and do the rest of these. And that's how we prepare the wax for the casting tree. Come back tomorrow for something else that I pull out of my butt last second so I can say that I posted something. Peace. Now, there are some potential issues that you can run into throughout this process, and I just wanted to touch on them for you guys in case they ever become an issue for you. First is that if you're going to use the FEP film that comes with your printer, or you're just going to use it in general, over time, you're eventually going to have that resin leaking through and getting onto your screen, and that can cause many potential issues down the road. If this issue isn't caught in time, then that resin is going to harden the next time the printer is used, and it's going to bind the screen and that bottom film of the resin vat together. And from there, it's essentially just all downhill from there. Now, to mitigate this issue, we've designed this simple jig that allows us to clean the bottom of the resin vat as well as the screen between each print without having to replace that resin that's in the vat itself. This saves us more time, this saves us more money, and down the road, it's actually going to increase the lifespan of that film as well as the screen. So if you have the extra time to go ahead and make yourself a custom jig for your resin vat, we suggest that you do that. The next issue that you can run into is that the build is not sticking to that build plate after you've changed the layer height to go lower. And the main reason that causes this is that the build plate itself is not perfectly parallel with that screen below. In order to print at lower layer heights consistently, that build plate needs to get as low as possible to that screen without there being potential issues. And if you think about it, if the build plate itself is at a slight tilt or at a slight angle, then that means that the other side, it can't get low enough to that screen, and that stops adhesion from occurring because the resin that's right there above that build plate, that cures, but it does not cure to the build plate itself because the build plate itself is not parallel. The way to fix this is to simply re-level the build plate. Now, every single printer, it has a method to do this, probably in its instruction manual. So take out the instruction manual and read it. Read it. I don't know who this is for, but you know who you are. Take out the instruction manual, read how to re-level the build plate, re-level the build plate, try it again. And the last issue that I want to bring up is screen defects. Now, 3D printer screens are notorious for going bad after a little bit of time, and that's because these screens are not like normal RGB pixels. They're a special type of pixel. These pixels act more like windows instead of RGB pixels. And what they do is that they determine if light is going to pass through them or not, depending on the voltage applied. Now, one of the downsides about this is that most of these pixels are actually set up in series instead of parallel, meaning that if one of the pixels go bad, all of the pixels down that line are going to go bad as well. Now, the way to fix this is probably just to replace the screen. Like, I'm not even kidding. In most cases, replacing the screen is far more affordable and far less expensive than just getting a new printer outright. So plus it teaches you to be like, more careful. But yeah, that's all I can think of for right now, at least. If you have any other potential issues that, are likely to occur, then please put them down in the comments and I will touch on them eventually. I'll touch on them eventually. So yeah, that's everything that you need to know for 3D printing jewelry and, making it for casting. I mean, I hope you enjoyed yourself because, man, this video was a lot to make. But hopefully this video saves you a lot of frustration and hopefully you're on your way to becoming a 3D printing pro. That's the goal. Shout out to the artists who let me use their songs. Their songs made the video as always, so please go show them some love, check them out. Make sure you check out busyworks.com. We design and create all of our jewelry in-house from scratch. So if you're interested in buying something and supporting, please, that's the best way to do it. If you're interested in 3D modeling or designing jewelry, please check out our Twitch. That's twitch.tv/busyworksllc. We document and we record us designing and creating the jewelry over there. And lastly, be sure to like and subscribe to help me become the littiest jeweler on YouTube. Every single like and subscribe, I get closer to spontaneous combustion, so that's always fun. And I'll see you guys the next time I decide to share all of my secrets. Love y'all. Bye. Oh, fuck. Wait. I forgot the jokes, didn't I? Well, to start off, I call one of my printers Prince Charming. Boy, if you don't... You get it? And the other one is Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Why are 3D printers terrible storytellers? They repeat the same layers. Oh, Dad, look, I'm a 3D printer. Say low. Didn't I tell your ass to close the door every time you're taking a shit?